Welcome to Escapists Anonymous, the fantasy fiction book club. I'm Sam.
And I'm Dan.
And this week we're finishing off Hannah Whitten's novel, The Foxglove King. It's got magical awakenings, romantic encounters, some bloody murders, double crosses, triple crosses, and of course spoilers. So join us as we see how it all plays out for Law, Gabe and Bastian as the eclipse approaches and a great reckoning is wrought.
Okay, episode 5, and we have just got to the very end of The Foxglove King by Hannah Whitten. So, prepare yourself, if you haven't listened to the previous couple of episodes, for some pretty significant spoilers. We would recommend that you go back and have a listen, but if you want to just listen along with us for the dulcet tones of our voices, then be prepared to have this book well and truly ruined for you. But I'll give a quick recap of what these last few chapters of the book that we've covered this week have revealed to us, and then we'll dive into the conversation. So, Law, Gabe and Bastian return to the docks to investigate the suspicious shipments that are being delivered. After having to fight in the underground boxing, Law ends up using Mortem to turn Milo, a thug we met earlier in the book, to stone. After they take him to Valen Mari's to figure out how to undo Law's magic, they find out from Mari that the mysterious shipments are being taken into the catacombs directly underneath the citadel. Law and Gabe finally kiss, and a bit more. And then the next night, Law and Bastian head down to the catacombs to find the villagers while Gabe keeps watch. They find the bodies, and Law channels Mortem to bring one of them back to life, except somehow she brings all of them back to life. The undead villagers chant, "They awaken, as do the new vessels." When they return to the surface, Anton is waiting for them with Gabe, and they're forcibly taken to the church, where Lord Belgard joins them. Anton tells them that they are working against the king, trying to prevent him from killing Bastian and starting a war. He says that Bastian is Apollonius's chosen recipient of the power of Spiritum within the Arsenault line, and also that the king is planning to raise an army of the dead for his war. However, now that Law has awoken the dead, she is the one in control of the army. He also explains that the king is planning to use transubstantiation during the eclipse to take both Law's and Bastian's channeling powers, and then will kill them both. Anton says that he has a plan to stop the king, but everyone must continue as normal so as not to alert the king's suspicions. They attend the king's eclipse celebrations, and Anton is conspicuously absent. The Presque-Mort seize Bastian and Law at the king's orders and incapacitate Gabe, and the king begins the transubstantiation ritual. At the moment of the eclipse, he presses the open wounds on Law's and Bastian's hands together. In that moment, they both gain access to each other's magic. Anton arrives and stops the ritual. He and the king argue, and then he stabs the king. With his last ounce of strength, the king throws a knife that hits Law in the abdomen. Law passes out and awakens in the rose garden. Anton is planning to kill her and transfer her power into Bastian. Anton has made a deal with the leader of the Night Sisters, the Night Priestess, who also just so happens to be Law's birth mother. As Anton is using Law's Mortem to try and kill his sixth and final village, completing the army of the dead, Law fights back with Spiritum, and she, together with Gabe and Bastian, fight back to overpower Anton. Bastian grants Anton a fate worse than death and becomes the new sainted king, with Law at his side. And the book ends as he rights the wrongs of overreigned society and makes Gabe the new priest exalted. Okay, so things escalated quickly.
There's a lot that happened just then.
It was a real rapid downhill sprint to the finish line.
Yeah, I think that captures it really well. You feel like there's more of a political build-up, like all things are happening, and then everything goes from 0 to 60 in about 20 pages.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at the book as a whole, which is something we can do now, having got to the end of it, I thought we could start off with some things that we really enjoyed from the book. And one of the things that I actually thought was really good was some of the character development throughout the book. Actually, in relation to all three of the characters in different ways. And specifically, I want to start with Law's gradual build up to the eventual discovery that she is this avatar for Nixara. And just the way we go from her having these powers and not really understanding them to the end where she's still not necessarily on the front foot around what's going on.
Yeah.
But
I think it's going from she has a sense of, okay, my powers are a bit abnormal, to actually understanding the full scope of how powerful she could be. And she's not there, but she has gone through this realization that, okay, I could be one of the most powerful people in the world. And it'd be interesting after that. And she has that revelation pretty close towards the end, because for a lot of it, she doesn't really know what's going on, to see where that would go in a future book. That sets up quite nicely for what could potentially be happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think gradually throughout where she goes with the Presque Moor to deal with the Mortem leak, it's very clear to her that she is more capable than pretty much everybody else. But the way she experiences it is really strange, and she has no kind of context for her own experiences. And actually, a lot of the book is about her starting to gather those little bits of information that allows her to think, okay, I think actually the way I experience channeling Mortem might be quite different to other people. But
yeah.
I loved having that mysterious voice talking to her while she's channeling, and all of that stuff. I thought it built this sense of something magical, mysterious.
Yeah. And rather than her kind of being caught up in events beyond her control, you kind of shift your perspective to realizing, oh, there's a destiny here. Whereas she thought she's been careening through life, just trying to get by. There has been a string pulling her towards these events that seems almost inexorable.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you make a good point about the characters going through a bit of a change. And I think, interestingly, Bastian doesn't necessarily go through as huge amount of a change as I originally thought, because I thought he was this closed book and he would open up. But really, he's already been quite developed. Towards the end of the book, you realize he's always had these opinions of wanting to change society, of wanting to upend the hierarchy that exists within the city. And rather than him having that realization, he's always had it, just been hidden. And really, the big change is at the very end, where he finally gets the ability to wield that power, and he takes a turn to the level of severity I wasn't really expecting.
Yeah, he adopts the ruthlessness probably that August has displayed. Really,
he is his father's son.
But I think I totally agree with what you're saying. Actually, his character doesn't necessarily change, but what us as the reader, and probably Law as our main character, who we see the story through, the way she sees him develops in this way, where he goes from assumed party boy through to co-investigator, part of the gang where they're trying to figure things out. And then at the end, like you say, he realizes that if he doesn't take the power, then somebody else will. And as he's had these discussions before, we know that he doesn't trust anybody else that might step into that role. So he realizes, or he decides, maybe more than realizes, that the way to lead is to be a strong, ruthless leader that says, you're either with me or you're against me.
But it shows he's not going in with eyes closed. He's not going to be one of those naive leaders of I'm just going to make everything better by being a good guy. He's gone in knowing, I know exactly how the system works. And even if I want to overturn it, I still have to be absolutely ruthless. But I think we always kind of got that sense of power driving him from the very start, but it felt more opportunistic at the start, didn't it? If he's working for Corythia, it's because he's looking just to get one up on his father. But you realize he's had this kind of general plan. but he's adaptable. Like, he didn't know he was going to be called up to this magical power. So, he's very adaptable.
Yeah.
So it's kind of opportunism to adaptability. And I think that's made him seem like a much stronger character.
Yeah. And to a certain degree throughout, he's been willing to be ruthless. Like, he wants to be Law's friend, but he also says throughout, well, if you don't turn coat and work for me, then I'm going to send you to the Burnt Isles.
Yeah. And you're never quite sure how honest he's being about that. But we see at the end when he's sending off people to the Burnt Isles, like, oh yeah, no, that's probably pretty accurate.
Yeah. So he's willing to use the levers that he's got available to him to get where he needs to be. And to be fair to him, it is a bit of a life and death situation. So you can't really hold it against him.
What about Gabe, though? Did he change as much? Because I felt like he was changing, and then he backtracked to going back to Anton. So like some of the growth and, maybe there's a wider world beyond the Presque Moor kind of got upended towards the end when he realized he was just telling Anton everything from the start.
Yeah, I think what really developed with Gabe was how annoyed he made me. And I liked him less and less throughout, which I think, to be fair to Hannah Whitten, I think is deliberate. I think we're supposed to get more and more frustrated with him as we go along. And we see this potential for him and Law, and he keeps kind of ruining it by being so attached to the religion, being so kind of in tow with Anton,
rigid.
and the whole I think we should go to Anton thing. And to be fair, I think Hannah Whitten did a really good job of sort of making me want to tear my hair out every time he said something like, we should go to Anton.
Yeah, because he has a very strong moral compass, and that's evidence of good character writing, because the character is leading the story rather than trying to make the character conform to the plot that you want. But in terms of the central three characters, I really liked them, and I thought there was some strong writing in developing who they were, and you believed with quite a lot of their actions for the majority of the book.
Yeah, it's got to be deliberate in a way that, we get annoyed that Law keeps just forgiving Gabe for some of his character flaws, and she's perhaps a much more forgiving character than I would be in that situation, but we're forced to kind of be like, okay, well, she's our main protagonist, we've got to go along on that journey,
but
with
also
her.
Because we're reminded that there is some greater destiny between the three of them, and I wonder if in the future books it will turn out that, their emotional connection meant she was always going to be more forgiving. And I kind of got that sense from early on as well. In terms of justifying why she does it, I felt like with that as the motivation, it was believable.
Yeah. So one of the other things that I did like was the overall depiction of kind of the city, but the citadel, the church. We talked about it, I think, in the first episode where we were talking about the Foxglove King. And I thought actually a lot of that was done really well. And I liked walking around the world that we were in with Law. I don't know, what did you make of that?
There were certain bits I really enjoyed, like the actual inside the citadel. It felt like Hannah Whitten had put a lot of thought into how that place would look and feel, the towers, the courtyards, the apartments, all that. I think less so about the city itself. That felt a little bit underdeveloped. I feel like you just had warehouse, docks, the fight club. But the actual citadel itself, which is the centerpiece of the whole story, really shone. She took so much time to tell us about all these things, and the way that it reflected society. When you've got the poison plants growing around the place like they're just decoration, whereas anyone found growing those in the city would be sent off to the Burnt Isles or executed. So, just throwing in those kind of details really let you feel this kind of just innate hypocrisy in everything that was in the citadel, and lead you to agreeing with Bastian's view that this is too corrupt and it needs to be torn down. And by doing that through scene description is really good.
Yeah, I think I do agree with you, actually. I think probably what I'm thinking of are those scenes that are very much within the citadel. Bizarrely, the croquet match and things like that, it's like I can almost picture a beautiful green lawn with this incredible backdrop of stunning buildings.
And in my head, the lawns could be on any level. Like, it's not all just at ground level, because the amount of exorbitant cost of building this thing. You could have a lawn, 100 meters up in the air, just on another level of apartments, just because they can do that.
Yeah.
because it's the obscene wealth that built the place.
Yeah. But also the library scenes, you get a sense of scale from some of those. The church itself, we have some decent description of maybe a little bit of a different feel within that whole higher echelons of society, where it felt a little bit darker and more mysterious in contrast with some of the party environment of the Citadel.
And the sheer scale of it meant that you could easily believe that there's a bunch of aristocrats just going around living their happy party lives and having no idea that there's all this subterfuge, backstabbing going on. Because, when you see them walking past and there's just a bunch of people being like, oh, Bastian, come over here and kiss all of us. And he's like, I don't have time for kissing all of you. And they're like, oh, well, have fun, whatever you're doing. They just don't care. And that's just it. It's a whole encapsulated world.
Yeah. The final thing that I wanted to touch on in terms of things that I found particularly interesting was some of those kind of social issues around sexuality and things like that. It was, it was very open and non-judgmental, and Bastian in particular, we're talking about here, is this character who he seems to flirt and openly discuss his sexual encounters with both men and women.
Yeah, there's that kind of more pleasant element of it when you have Law casually mentioning that she has two mothers.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that can happen in a fantasy world. You can have queerness that doesn't have to be commented on. But then you've also got that slight bit where the one person who's emphasized as being bisexual is Bastian, and he's this inherently untrustworthy, unknowable figure. And like having that kind of, not monosexual, so not just gay or straight, but having someone who's in flux in between makes them, mysterious and suspicious. And that is one bit that I feel like, oh, that's interesting, but perhaps a little bit tied in with a suspicion of bisexuality.
That's interesting. I didn't really look at it that way. I just thought it was like, this is one of the very sort of top people within society. And he's making it very clear that it's okay to express your sexuality in whatever way you want.
But that's the difference, it's when you're viewing it from within the world or from us as the reader. And with from us as the reader, there's that thing of like, well, how is that person portrayed? Whereas, within the world, you're like, oh, well, this would be great. Like just people who are openly queer at any level of society, there's no judgment about it. And then the fact that we know that we have this lesbian couple as well, equally living perfectly unbothered lives in terms of all of that, that it's acceptable. It's just whether us as the reader and the lens that we apply to it, what that says about those particular characters.
Very interesting. So now that we've covered off some positive things, let's get on to some of the critiques.
Yeah, the critiques.
So what's the main thing on the top of your head?
It was just the fact that, like, as the kind of plot was revealed to you, I wasn't like, oh, of course. I was instead going, oh, really? Because when they're captured by Anton, that's at Bastian and Law, and then they go to kind of like this interrogation kind of area where all the press game are surrounding them going, don't you see what our grand plan is? And Lord Bellegarde walks in and they're like, didn't you realize that when you accidentally bumped into him and you saw him holding a piece of paper in his hand, that was of course for you, and then when he hid the other one, he was expecting you to find that one and follow the simple breadcrumb trail that I'd left ever so cleverly.
Yeah, I 100% had the same thought. The note was, borderline ridiculous.
Yeah, because who was the first one for? When they bump into him in the hallway, was he expecting her to be running down the hallway at that point? Like, doesn't make any sense.
No, and also that whole thing, this was all a grand plan. Obviously, there's the whole thing about Dani saying about her boyfriend. So they wanted them to go down to the docks. They wanted them to find out. Surely...
But they didn't even go and find out the way that they intended them to find out.
Exactly. It's like, what? So they just hoped that somehow they would find out that information. Well, Anton had all the information. He could have just made that really plainly obvious.
Yeah.
So I've got in my head that Gabe was reporting to Anton all along.
Only to the extent that the plot allows it, because they also wanted him to not know about everything. So seemingly he's blabbing to Anton, but Anton's filling him in on like, yes, now you need to send them here, then there. But Gabe couldn't have known about everything, but he just happened to lead them to just the right places. So in theory, Anton's plan is, of course, going, yes, that secret fighting ring that Bastian is part of. He'll, of course, take them there because Danny's told them. Of course, they'll go on lightweight night, so Laura will have to fight.
And then that drug-addled Milo will accost them in the alleyway.
Which will force them to go to Laura's parents' house, of course, and then one of them, as they're leaving, will tell them to go to the catacombs. It's foolproof.
Yeah, it's very Dr. Evil.
I feel like what might have actually happened was Anton had this whole thing where they would stumble across the bodies being moved down to the catacombs. And, so he set up all of his guards, everything for them to be like, oh, we'll piece it all together, of course. And none of that happened. And so Anton went to these people at the warehouse, like, so you saw them turn up and they saw you take to the catacombs. And they're like, no, the Bastian, Lord, none of them ever showed up. I don't know what happened. He's like, well, my great plan. Oh, no, they've turned up anyway. Oh, this is fine. Okay, it worked out fine. It's all good.
It becomes a little bit unconvincing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm a bit confused by Gabe's whole role in all of this. And actually, if he's the pawn that Anton's been playing the whole way through, all of the things he wants to do would work against what Anton would ideally have them doing. He tries to persuade them not to go and, investigate the catacombs, not to go down to the docks. Like, not all of these things are like, these are the things that we find out at the end that Anton wanted them to be doing.
Yeah, he was like the one person really trying to make Anton's plan not work.
Yeah.
So, as a series of events where things are happening, I was like, oh, this is fun. When they get into the fighting pits, it's cool. We'd see Milo again, and for them to use Mortem to turn him into this living statue, I thought was really cool.
Yeah. It's kind of the opposite. You were like, maybe they'll use it as a way to heal people with medical problems. It's like, nope, they're going to use it as a weapon.
They're going to turn them to stone. Of course.
I tell you what, that bit really annoyed me with Gabe.
Yeah.
Just how annoyed he is at Law for defending herself.
I know.
And the kind of sulk that he has throughout. Oh, God.
He refers to Milo like, well, hopefully the victim will be okay. And it's like they couldn't have reasoned with him. It wasn't like if Gabe had stepped up and gone, no, don't you see? Violence isn't the answer. Milo would have just shanked him.
Yeah.
But I thought it was nice for Law to take the opportunity to go and meet up with Val and Mari again, because it gave her a bit of closure with them. Val could explain that they were going to hang anyway, so really she didn't have much choice. Because I think if we hadn't have had that scene, you would have felt that Val, despite all the close parental connection, really was just quite happy to sell out Law when given the opportunity.
Yeah.
But the whole thing down at the docks just feels like a real dead end. It had these nice little moments, but ultimately, I feel like there was a way that we could have got those characters to learn the information about the catacombs without going through all of that.
So, what if they just chilled out for the whole book and then turned up at the eclipse ceremony?
Yeah.
You'd have had the exact same outcome, wouldn't you?
Yeah, pretty much. Well, actually, no. Did Anton need Law to have ended up in the catacombs, to have solved his Mortem lock, to have tried to speak to one of the corpses and have raised them all so they're already an activated army?
Well, so he needed her there to be able to do the whole dream walking thing and use her power to kill the villagers.
Yes.
My understanding is that they were going to take her power anyway. And so whatever she did, they would have been able to do using the transubstantiation. So they could have just brought her in and said, we want to give you a really nice time. Let's hook you up with Bastian, and then you get close together and you hone each other's powers. But what they did was they created a scenario that allowed them to conspire against Anton and the king. So it ends up being this counterproductive operation.
Maybe Anton was like, we'll invite her to the palace, and then she will live here and be with Bastian and be his little crumpet for a few weeks, and then we will unleash the plan. But August is like, but we could get her to uncover the treason of him with Carithia. No, that's not a real thing. Your drug-addled mind is telling you that your son is a traitor. And you're right. As a result, they start digging around, trying to find out the truth. Bastian's super paranoid. And if they had just been more chill as grand conspirators, you're right. Come the consecration, absolutely blindsided them. take the powers.
Yeah.
Gabe is kind of there, but is still with Anton, hasn't had to question all of these things.
Because, someone has the conversation around the king has to have a justification for killing Bastian.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And it's like, well, in the end, he just decides to do it publicly in front of a bunch of people anyway for the purposes of literally taking his power.
Yeah. Doesn't accuse him of being a traitor at all.
No.
No. At the end, August does seem pretty out of it from the drugs. So I think to an extent the plan does go out of the window. Like when Law bumps into him a couple of days before and he's just like, I hate my son and he's all awful. I can't wait to kill him.
He's just walking around openly telling people that he's got a plan to off his own son for the last couple of days.
With the visions and the prophecy and everything as well, there's some cool bits because you feel like there's more to Anton's visions that we're not going to find out now. Because he says like, oh, he mentioned you by name a couple of times. And that seems like, oh, okay, so there is an extensive series of prophecies that he's seen. And it can still be open to interpretation because if August misunderstood them, I know Anton's the one who saw them himself, but Apollonius has just said, I need these three people brought together? Or is there almost like the other gods are all competing with each other? That's the kind of question I've got there, which could, be explained further in the other books. Because if Apollonius is working at his own agenda, of course he wants to be the only god again. But is it that there's some kind of other prophecy ordained where all the gods need to rise, but it's the organization of the church which is the thing that's preventing that from happening, and they only want Apollonius? Because there's a few different comments that happen towards the end there where you get the feeling there's the human motives at play. So, there is only room for one god. There certainly isn't room for six. We can't have another god's fall. These all seem like things said by humans who are worried about this kind of cycle of how gods are reborn and rise again. And they're trying to interrupt this seemingly preordained natural cycle.
Yeah, and it links potentially to what the dead villagers are chanting, they awaken, as do the new vessels, which I guess you could interpret it as just Apollonius and Nyxara as Law and Bastian.
It seems like it could be all six.
I was kind of starting to lean towards that as a potential explanation. So I was killed by the night as well. It was something I wrote down as a question. To me, that doesn't explain Anton using Law's powers to kill them.
Yeah.
Is it just that it happened at night?
Like this, is it kind of this big cloud of black mortem descended upon the village?
Maybe.
But because we don't have another scene where she successfully talks to a body and we learn what happened, maybe there was supposed to be a scene, but they felt, oh no, this gives too much away.
So one of my other questions that I've got written down is, would you hire Law as a spy?
No.
Because there's a bit when we first rejoin at the beginning of this section where it's like dreadfully obvious reconnaissance work. She's sort of overtly asking, what cargo is your boyfriend? I'm just super interested in cargo, guys. I'm not a spy.
It's a perfectly common hobby to be interested in dockside cargo.
I think she actually says something like that.
Yeah. And it's supposed to be a moment of levity, I guess. It's supposed to be a humorous thing where she's floundering for answers. But it just ties into that larger thing of Law's no good at this. She's terrible.
We didn't mention last time, but it turns out that Michael knew all along that she was spying on him. I mean, we're starting to go back through her history of spying now and find out that she wasn't very good at it.
And she keeps having to ask people just to tell her what's going on. She has no ability to piece two and two together. When Anton's like, and of course, this was my plan, and this and this, and Laura just has to go, speak plain English, man. What are you getting at? And he's just like, oh, it's this. I'm doing this. And it's like, okay, at what point is Law actually on the front foot? At what point do her deductive powers allow her to figure something out and get ahead of the plot? I don't think that happens once.
No, I agree. And in the last episode, we said eventually Law's got to figure it out. I'm not 100% sure that she ever really did.
No, she didn't.
Events just kind of happened around her and she was a sort of bit of a passenger.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, the ending when she does like zap Anton, that is good for giving her agency.
Yeah.
I mean, like the 2 days that she's locked in her room, wouldn't that have been the point where she goes, all right, Law, pull yourself together. Let's sneak out. Let's go and find what's actually going on. Let's upend some stuff. You can't rely on Bastian. You can't rely on Gabe. Let's use all those skills that I've got to go and do some proper good sleuthing. Something like that.
She just gets pissed.
Yeah.
I'm with you. So I'm trying to think of some outstanding questions, really, that I've got. One of them, actually, is, and we talked about it over the last 2 episodes, really, about this kind of connection between Law and Gabe. I still haven't got an understanding of why the two of them have a connection. I understand Law and Bastian having the connection as Nyxara and Apollonius's sort of avatars, potentially. I'm not any the wiser as to what the familiarity thing that Law has with Gabe is about.
Not just that, but it's also between Bastian and Gabe as well. There's some points where Bastian mentions as well. He's like, don't you see? It's all 3 of us. All 3 of us are connected. He says something along those lines.
Maybe that's something to carry over into the next one.
Yeah, is Gabe going to be another one of these avatars? Because he is from a different kingdom. Maybe he's been near one of the other dead gods. Maybe something like that. But there's the trio of them, and they're all bound together. We know this much, but that whole thing isn't really answered.
And to be fair, it's fine to leave some questions unanswered if you're planning a trilogy.
Yes. One that I've got is I still am quite skeptical whether Law's birth mother is actually her birth mother. Like, I don't believe it. Like, she acts so weird. Like, when she turned up at the end, I was really surprised. But then for her to be such this passive figure, I don't know if it just serves the purpose of going like, look, this birth mother never really loved her. She was happy for her to die. The religion came first. But the disconnect between Law and her mother just seemed more along the lines of this was a woman who grew affection towards Law, but wasn't really her mother. Because Law's memories are always so fuzzy from the time in the catacombs, purposefully so. I would not be surprised if in one of the next books we get told, well, of course, I was never your real mother. You know, it's my theory from the previous episode where I said I think that she is literally the daughter of Nyxara, like birthed out of the tomb.
It's a strange one, though, because I would have thought in that scenario, given that they have this belief that whoever the avatar for Nyxara is needs to be killed like they did with the previous Night Witch, why wouldn't they have just killed her at birth, especially if they hadn't built that connection with her yet?
Yeah.
So who knows? I think it's an interesting theory. I'm probably still leaning on the side of she was chosen, kind of like Bastian was chosen as this kind of avatar for the second coming of the gods.
Speaking of theories that we had, in the previous episode, we had guessed that the Anton August plan was going to fall apart and one of them was going to betray the other in a kind of conflict between church and state. We called that one absolutely right. Also, that Gabe would be a sneaky little boy and go to Anton.
Yeah.
We called that right. And also, we got right that Gabe might end up as the priest exalted.
Yeah, and that Bastian and Law would end up as king and queen. We've done pretty well at various different parts of seeing where it's going.
Yeah.
In spite of all of that, it still doesn't feel like it landed in the place that I thought it was going to.
Yeah.
That's the really strange thing about it. Did you think the sort of romantic conclusion was also really disappointing? It just kind of fizzled out.
This ties into that critique I talked about with Godkiller. When you're doing one of these seemingly planned trilogies where like you've got almost all 3 books written and they're going to come out a year apart, you have this tendency to leave things more open because you know exactly that you know that you're continuing the story. It's not like I finished a book and then I'll start writing the next one and see where we go. So of course this romance between the 3 of them needs to blossom and we're curious about who will she choose. Will it be both? Ooh. But yeah, like you had no real romantic connection with Bastian. It seemed actually quite platonic, despite the intensity of it. And the thing with Gabe, it went to a kiss, an intense kind of like holding of each other, and then it ended. And I feel that there should have been a bit more. It leaves it that you don't know where she's going to go with that relationship, but it did feel unfulfilling, especially considering this was advertised as a romance.
Yeah, and I think that's where I get to, where I thought that there should be something in the end of this where there is a kind of romantic, at least comma, to carry into the next book, because you have that interaction with Gabe, which is hot and steamy for a very short period of time. She has a very functional kiss with Bastian.
They make it very clear that it is an intentionally closed mouth kiss. It's a facsimile of a kiss.
And then obviously you get the betrayal from Gabe. That seems to draw a line under the potential future romance, or you would think. So we'd started off with this love triangle thing, and by the end of it, I didn't really get a sense that there was any romance at all left in the story. So there wasn't any kind of hanging question mark. But then also she's sitting on the throne as the queen next to Bastian, and that's a very strange dynamic.
Yeah. So when we finished the previous book, when we finished Godkiller, I said, what would I do with this book? And with that one, I would recommend it to someone. And I'm not too fussed about getting it back. With Foxglove King, I don't know if I would. I think I'd have to read the next one. If the trilogy pays off, I'd recommend it.
I was thinking I'd recommend this to somebody who was into romance literature and wanted to dip their toes into a fantasy world.
Yeah.
Because I was like, well, okay, maybe someone who would like Twilight or something might like this. I think this book was a new thing for both of us. We both said, not the kind of book that we would have necessarily picked up, especially after we read the blurb. It's like, okay, romance, bit different in terms of it being a kind of foreground topic.
But the ability of Bound to do this deep dive discussion of a book over multiple episodes, what we can hope that we've conveyed is that there's lots to like about this book. People could still read this, and and I'm sure if there's people who've read along as we've doing the episodes, they might have experienced the same thing and still enjoyed 85% of it.
Yeah. So the other question is, would you like to live in this world?
No, I'm not up for this one at all. Sounds horrible. Death gods, you'd never feel comfortable. Massive disparity in wealth between literally everybody. Everything's on the edge of war. The mechanics of the magic aren't fun. You have to almost die to be able to access it. The gods are these distant dead bodies. No, this world is not for me. Definitely not.
So for me, I have a sort of qualified answer to this.
Okay.
If I can be one of the nobility living in the citadel, just partying all the time.
Oh, yeah.
I'm actually pretty up for it. But if I have to be outside of the citadel walls, I'm out.
I mean, you pose an interesting question there, because for me, I was just like, if I'm just the average Joe Schmo wandering around this world, and that's kind of what I'd want to be, just like some random dude, not bottom of the pile, not top, just some random dude, would I enjoy this world? And this one, definitely not. Yes, if I was aristocracy, top of the pile, for sure. If I was one of the 6 people who are reincarnations of a god, I don't even know if I'd be having a good time then.
So, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No. We'll have to make a choice at some point in the future whether we return to Hannah Whitten's world.
Yeah.
If people want to get in touch and let us know, did you enjoy the book and actually would like us to read the next one, The Hemlock Queen, at some point in the future? If you do, let us know. If there's enough interest, we'll probably return. But there are ways people can get in touch.
There are. So if you do want to get in touch and let us know that, or give us your thoughts on the Foxglove King and the discussions that we've had today, then you can do so across social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, etc. We are at Escapists Anonymous Pod. So reach out, drop us a message, let us know, and we will enjoy hearing everybody else's opinion on this one as well. Also, if you want to support us, then you can do so by leaving a review, giving us a rating on whatever your podcast platform is. If it allows you to do that, that would massively help us out.
Definitely.
And we will be back in the next episode in 2 weeks' time, reading The Book That Wouldn't Burn. by Mark Lawrence. So we're going to read chapters 1 through to the end of chapter 17 to start with, and we'll be discussing those chapters in the next episode. So all that's left to say is thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Escapist Anonymous podcast. It's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.